All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Jim Stallings. I'm the director of the chess program here at UT Dallas. And we're very pleased tonight to have a truly great guest, the 2017 Chess Educator of the Year honoree, Mr. Grandmaster Andy Soltis. But before we get started, and Dr. Ellen Safely she's the Dean of Libraries, is going to tell you a little bit more about our honoree tonight. Ellen?
So I'm sorry about the temperature in here. It's cold. So I'd like to welcome you tonight to the University of Texas at Dallas and also to McDermott Library. We have a really long history with the chess team. We work to provide research materials on chess, as well as helping with the Chess Fest activities. I looked it up this afternoon. Actually, I had somebody do it. And we have 2,000 books on chess in the library. And since August of 2013, they've been checked out 3,000 times. So that's pretty nice. Maybe that's reflected in how good our chess team does. Kind of teasing. So I also would like to welcome Andrew Soltis tonight. He is I had to do a lot of work for this, so I'm going to read it to you. He's an international chess grandmaster, and he is a member of the U.S. Chess Hall of Fame. Sounds very important. But what I thought was really interesting is he learned how to move the pieces around a chessboard at age 10 from a book that he used at a public library. My understanding is you never had a teacher? Never had a teacher. So read a book. He's a major writer on chess. He has written a column for the New York Post and a monthly column for a journal called Chess Life since 1972. I did the math. That's a couple thousand columns. It sounds like a lot of work. And he has written over 100 books, many of which were translated into languages other than English. Here's a few titles, just, so you can go check them out. Pawn Structure Chess, What It Takes to Become a Grandmaster. David versus Goliath Chess, or, I like this part, How to Beat a Stronger Player. Studying Chess Made Easy, 100 Chess Master Trade Secrets, and a 100 Best Games of the 20th Century Ranked. I asked him about that earlier, and there is a scientific method that he used to do this. He authored the book Soviet Chess, 1917 to 1991, and what I read was that was your favorite book. So maybe you can tell us why. He also wrote a book entitled Mikhail Botvinnik, The Life and Games of the World Chess Champion, and that was named the 2014 Book of the Year by the Chess Journalists of America. He was inducted into the U.S. Chess Hall of Fame in 2011, and he's received countless awards. It's quite impressive. But I was really intrigued by something called Several Defense Moves and Chess Openings. They're all to his credit. One is called The Solstice Variation of the Sicilian Defense. Sounds like a book on war. Tonight, I'd like to recognize Andrew Soltis, and he'll be speaking to us about why we study chess all wrong. So welcome.
Thank you, Ellen. I'm going to start by using one of my favorite quotes. It's from a sometimes chess player named Winston Churchill. He wasn't a really great chess player. He was a fan of chess to some degree. And what Churchill said was he loved to learn, but he hated being taught. And I think that applies in a way to a lot of chess players. We love to learn about chess. There's just so much to learn about chess. It's that studying stuff that gets in the way. And what Churchill was talking about was this kind of disconnect that afflicts so many of us when we want to get ahead in the game. People tell us, study this, go after that, and we don't know why. And there's no explanation. And if there's no explanation of why you should be studying it, it's like your parents telling you to eat broccoli. because it's good for you. So if I can, I think I'll start with an example here. The type that, oops, daisy, double click, that you get, you see I'm going blind as I get older. There we go. This is not exactly this position, but this is a kind of position you find in a lot of introductory chess books. These three pieces in the lower right-hand corner, the knight, the bishop, and the king, you should mate with these pieces against that lone king. And what the books will say is that you should learn this because it's a basic endgame. And what does that mean? And the impression that the book will give you is that it's something that comes up a lot. This is what chess teachers like to say a lot. It's what we call a lie. It never comes up. I mean, I've been playing chess for 50 years. I've never come close to anything like this. But it is an important thing to learn, or to learn this technique, because the techniques that you learn by mating here are applicable in other positions, a great many other positions. With best moves, well, say if you play, typical moves like moving this king towards the center, white can deliver checkmate in about, let me see, about 25 moves. Does anybody know what the best move here is? Any chess team members here have a suggestion? Well, there are actually two good moves that win quickly. One is this. Let's make a black move here. And the other move is bishop to b5. And you could play these in the different order. You can play the bishop move out first, and then the knight. Why these moves? Well, all of a sudden the black king is caught in 6 squares. It's limited to these 6 squares. You can go to the square it's on, b7, you can go to a7, a8, b8, c8, d8, that's it. The other 58 squares it has no access to. And when you don't have a pawn to win a chess game with, the only way you can win is by limiting the other king slowly and eventually delivering checkmate with your remaining forces. That's the real lesson here that you pick up. As you progress through this, if you go through those books and you understand why you should be learning this, let's see if we make a few more moves. Now the white king can advance. The black king can't do anything but just, pass, bide his time. It can get as far as you can see, this d8 square. e7 is taken away by the knight, e8 by the bishop, d7 by the bishop, and so on. So back we go, up we go here, up we go here, there. And now we're getting into a position that's sort of interesting because you can only win many truly basic endgames because your opponent has to make a move that loses. In other words, he has to do something that weakens his position. Most of these endgame books never tell you that when they're discussing this type of endgame. If you've played card games, in Rummy, you have to make a discard that's going to lose. That's the situation that black finds himself in here. If you know contract bridge, you make a discard, so that you have to give away your last trump, and that's, I guess I'm not supposed to use the word trump. But anyway, this is the situation that black finds himself in here. He's going to have to go crawling away to safety, and white just moves up the board. And eventually, let's see here, we reach a position like this. doesn't look like white can make any more progress. And in fact, he can't make progress the normal way you would in a chess game by attacking him. Anybody knows how many checks were made in the game so far?
0.
0. Yeah, that you don't really check. You don't. There's a great temptation here to win by checking. The way you win this type of position, you stick the bishop there. It doesn't really matter what black does. He's only limited to 2 legal moves. And we're closing the net further. Let's see, let's go here. And now white has a couple of different winning moves. That's one of them. The other was the moving knights to this square. And now here, here, here. And finally, white gets to check. Check. How many moves did that take? 15. That's not bad. And again, by limiting the black king of those first 2 moves, white saved about 10 moves of work. That's a fairly, succinct lesson, and it's one that I think every chess player should, even strong players, should work on, because learning that type of information makes you want to come back for more. Chess is just such a hard game to study that you need an incentive to come back. And if you get discouraged by what you're being fed, if you don't make chess studying fun, it becomes drudgery, and it really drives you away. And what you really want to get is that kind of magical experience, which happens so little in I guess, I hate to say academics, that you can leave a lesson and you know that you learned something. You can leave a lesson and feel and hope that you learned something. You can leave that French grammar class and think, okay, maybe another month it's all going to fit together, and I'll be able to say something other than recite something about the pen of my aunt. But in chess, you don't have those kind of magical moments. This is maybe one of them, when you learn something specifically useful. And chess teachers, good chess teachers, have learned to encourage their students to come back. One of the ways they do that, and I've never really believed in this, but they say you have to start by learning the endgame first. That is, you have to look at endgames, positions like this with only a couple of pieces. And they make up some story about how are you going to be able to play with 32 pieces and pawns if you can't handle 3, or in this case, 4. There's actually an ulterior motive here. What they want you to do is to get to that point of knowing that you learned something that day. And I'll give you another example here. Hold on a second. And it's a type of lesson that you can give to, why am I doing this wrong? Okay, here we go. And this is truly a basic endgame. Okay. King and pawn versus king. It's important to learn this type of thing. And a chess teacher can take someone who just walked in off the street, learned how the pieces move yesterday, and they can teach you everything you need to know about king and pawn versus king in one lesson, maybe even an hour. And what I mean by everything, I mean, we could set up another position that's one of the many positions in which white wins. And at the end of the lesson, that student should be able to win that endgame against anyone, against Magnus Carlsen, if Magnus Carlsen somehow ended up with the king, the black king. And And with the opposite situation, we could set up one of the many positions in which it's just forced draw. And at the end of that hour, a student should be able to draw even if white is Stockfish or Ribka or one of the many computers. This is actually one of the hardest endgames with king and pawn versus king. You can see white only has 6 moves that he can choose from. Pawn can go there, pawn can go there, the king can go there, the king can go there, here, here. How many of those moves actually win by force? 2. He's right, yeah. It's 2. Let's see what happens if it doesn't. The temptation is to play the pawn up. And that's bad because we're soon going to get a position where white cannot make significant progress. He'll make progress for a while. Oops, a daisy. He's got halfway there. He wants to queen that pawn. But black will just sort of dance around in front of him. And let me go here. Okay, we're getting to a critical position. Finally, black has to make an only move. And now it becomes clearer that this is a draw, because that's the only way to make progress, and that's stalemate. Now, let's go back to the start and see how it should have been played. White can move here, or he can go to f2. Either one of those moves will win. And this seems sort of esoteric, but it's actually very valuable, because to win this, you have to learn the principle known as king opposition. You have to get into one of those situations where the black king loses because he has to give way. There's actually a technical name for that. It's called Zugzwang. It's an unpronounceable German word, which is also impossible to define. It just means that you lose because you have to move. And let's see if black will try to do the same type of thing that he did before, to stand in front of the pawn, but eventually, whatever he does, he has to give way, because now white can go like that. And let's see. Let's be fancy and make a one move, white move, one pawn, just go one square, because we want to create another Zugzwang position. The black king has to give way. And let's see. And now the pawn can just walk straight in. And when a student has an opportunity to play through this, even a difficult position like this, and learn this, at the end of the lesson, it's not just that he learned something or she learned something, but they know that they learned something, and that's extremely rare. And even more important, if you ever get a chance to apply this knowledge, it's something you'll never forget. My wife and I, Marcy is in the audience, we used to play in this tournament in Bermuda every year, right around this time. Well, it's held at this time of year because this is the worst time of year to be in Bermuda, so naturally that's when they have the chess tournament. But she got into one of these king and pawn endgames, and she realized that the only way to win was something called triangulation. Of course, where else should you know about triangulation than Bermuda? But the thing is, she figured it out, and it was like, this great epiphany of wow. And there are very few wows in chess studying. We need more of those. Now I'm going to quote from another book. It's a book with a wonderful title. It's called How to Get Better at Chess. It's a book that nobody in chess has ever heard of, basically. If you look at Amazon, I think its ranking right now is about 2.9 million on their sales list. There are hundreds or actually thousands of chess books that are ahead of it that sell better. It was not written by a master. It was written by a woman who's fairly new to the game, named Betty Roberts, and it came out about 30 years ago. But what she did is she went to chess tournaments, including some famous ones, Lone Pine, California in the 1980s. And she just went up to people, famous grandmasters, and she said, how do you get better at chess? I mean, should we do this? Should we do that? She got responses that were really hard to imagine because some of them were very specific. Should you spend more time studying than playing? And Pal Benko said, no, 75% study, 25% play. And Mato Damjanovic of Yugoslavia said, no, 80% play, 20% study. And Florin Gheorghiu, one of my old opponents, said, no, the ratio is 7-5, so let's see, that's 58%. And how she got these people to talk like that, I can't imagine. But one of the most interesting questions she posed was, okay, grandmaster, you're a grandmaster. What's the difference between a grandmaster and an international master? And I have to explain that international master is like one step below the rankings. It's really hard to make that jump from to get to grandmaster. And she thought she was going to get responses like, well, the difference is calculating ability or it's natural talent. And the words that came back to her were dedication, discipline, desire. That just shocked her. But I think that's also the secret here because it's all about doing those lessons and coming back for more time after time. The next problem for studying, though, is there's so much to study, so much you could learn. It's when to turn it off. It's when I don't want to learn anything more about the Najdorf variation of the Sicilian defense. I've already learned that much. There is a very strong law of diminishing returns in chess. I think to get to be an average chess player, you absolutely have to know a certain amount of the tactics. You have to know the pins, the skewers, the forks, the double attacks, all of the basic ways of winning a game through tactical means. But if you get any better at tactics, it doesn't translate. You could become the world's best tactician, and it may only gain another 100 rating points to where you were there. And that's true in a whole bunch of other areas. Learning a little bit more of this will not translate into better results. There's a best-selling chess book called 100 Chess Endgames You Must Know. No, of course not. You don't need to know 100 chess endgames. Mark Dvoretsky, who was probably the world's greatest chess teacher, had a book of endgames, and he had something like 250 endgames that you absolutely must know. I think you can get to be a pretty accomplished player knowing about 24, for the simple reason that you're not going to get to too many endgames. there's, endgame tomes that are like this big, and they're filled with how to win when you have an extra pawn, or even when an endgame where you have no extra pawns, just you have positional advantages. And the truth is, until you're about 1,500 players, a 1,500 rating, which is an average rating, if you reach an endgame, you're not going to have an extra pawn, you're going to have an extra rook. You're going to win that endgame whether you know anything about endgame technique or not. You just have to know a certain amount. And talk to you about openings in that regard. You really don't need to know a lot about openings. And this fact was brought home to me not long ago when I was reading a book by a guy named Dan Heisman, who's a chess teacher, one of my old opponents. He teaches in the Northeast, and one of his students was not a young player. He didn't have a lot of time to spend on chess. In fact, he had a very busy career on radio. He's actually a superstar on radio. Some of you may have heard of him. His name is Howard Stern. Howard Stern was a chess student for a while, and Dan Heisman was his teacher. And he asked Heisman to teach him how to defend against pawn to e4, which is the most common move played at the amateur level. And Dan could have given a whole bunch of stuff. He actually did me a favor. He recommended an opening that I had suggested in a book. And it begins like this. White has three or four good moves. This is by far the most likely. He taught Stern to play that. Again, White has, 2 or 3 good moves with his other pieces. Knight out, the bishop move. This is the move that most players fear. Now, this comes out. This is called the Berlin defense, but opening names don't mean anything. Opening names change, and of course, this isn't going to remain a Berlin defense for very long. White, when he finds this position, almost always plays this, and that's something that Howard Stern could count on, because then he could reply this. Knight takes the pawn. White has only one good move for an advantage. I'm not going to give you an analysis, just believe me, this is true. And now, this is the move that I recommend. And the reason, well, first of all, you're not going to find it in any books, mainly because it transposes into something else. Books are famous for not explaining transpositions. And there's only one good move for various reasons there, and now we've transposed into a totally different opening called the open defense. It's not going to be the open defense for very long, because I recommended, and Dan passed on to Howard, this move. This is actually called the Riga defense. I have no idea why. Actually, I do, but somebody analyzed this in a Latvian magazine well over 100 years ago. And now we get into an interesting situation where Black is on autopilot. Black can play his next several moves really probably not without thinking. White has to work hard because, well, first of all, he's down a pawn, down 2 pawns, and there are only a couple of moves. There's only one good move usually in most of these positions that has any chance of advantage, and any other move will get a disadvantage. At first, this looks like a terrible position for Black because of that. Threatens the knight. The knight can't move because it's pinned. That's one of those tactics that you must learn. Black responds pawn to d5. And now white plays knight takes d4. The only good move, the only move to avoid a disadvantage. And now it looks like white's winning, because he's not only threatening this knight takes c6 move, which wins material, he's also threatening pawn to f3. There's no move that defends against both threats. So we have to come up with some magic. And here's the magic. The bishop comes out. Black is threatening to castle and get away with, he'll still be a pawn ahead. So white plays this. And now you can imagine Howard Stern playing bishop takes h2 check. This is where, if white doesn't know this opening cold, he's in a lot of trouble. And if he doesn't know it and he's not a master, let's put it that way, a master can see pretty quickly that there's only 3 legal moves by the white king. If he takes the bishop, black will draw in a couple of moves by force. Queen comes out here, only legal moves there, there, perpetual check. And of course you can't be too upset, drawing. Of course you only played a chess game for 12 moves. The game's already over, but black can't expect much more than that. So white shouldn't do that. He could play the king to f1, and that's the safety move that a lot of people will play without thinking. It's also the only move that may lose. The best move, believe it or not, is king to h1. It's a hard move to play unless you really know this variation. And the reason is that all of a sudden the queen comes out and threatens discovered check. Threatens to bring the bishop out, say to g3, king goes there, and then bishop takes f2 check, followed by mayhem. So anybody who's not on the chess team know what the best move here is? Any guesses? The temptation here would be to bring the knight back, say here, 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 forking the bishop and the knight. What's wrong with that?
Well, you can also fork the queen and the king on f2.
Yeah.
Knight takes f2.
Knight takes f2 is mate. So in fact, if he plays knight to d4 check, he's already losing. Okay, chess team members, what's the right move? It's rook takes. And you can imagine white trying to find this on his own without having memorized the variations. Anybody know what you do here? Well, of course, you play and here and here and here. And now we can see why the king went to h1. If it had gone to f1, we'd count up the pieces and we discover that black has, let's see, 2 bishops, 2 rooks, and 7 pawns. White has a rook, 3 minor pieces, and 4 pawns, 5 pawns. So he's down pawn. He's losing. White would be 2 pawns down and the exchange and losing. Fortunately, that's not the case because white can play this. Now, this position actually exists in opening books. It's been on the opening books for 100 years. Usually the conclusion that white wins, which is pretty bizarre to begin with. It's there simply because there was a famous game that was played about 100 years ago in which white did in fact win. It helped that white was Jose Capablanca. His opponent was actually a pretty good player. His name was Edward Lasker. Marcy and I knew Edward Lasker. Ed Lasker was my link to the 19th century, because I played him when I was a young man, when I was about 20 years old. And when he was about 20 years old, he played guys who used to play Steinitz, so the first world champion. And I'm not going to go in much further here, but it's actually a very difficult position. In the early days of, well, not too long ago, if you showed this to a computer, the computer would say black is better. It takes a while for you to figure out that, that white is actually it's in very good shape, because the minor pieces play better than the extra rook. It's not, I'm not going to go into it because it only becomes evident for several moves. But here's the point. It's the only way white gets an advantage after black plays the first move of the Riga variation, which was, what, 6 moves ago. And white has to find all sorts of hard moves to get this far. And when Dan Heisman asked Howard Stern, did you ever get this position? He said, that's ridiculous. He had played the Riga variation about 100 times, either online or in tournaments. He always equalized much earlier, because none of his opponents got anywhere close to this. By learning this one simple opening, he was able to get where he wanted to go, which is to a playable middle game, which is everybody's goal when they play chess. Let me see. Getting back to Betty Roberts' book, she asked a lot of the players about memory, because you have to memorize some moves to play this far. And she got the typical grandmaster response, which is, no, memory is horrible. You need understanding. Only if you have understanding can you play chess well. There's no secret. Which, considering that grandmasters spend most of their time memorizing chess openings, is a bit of a misleading situation. It's a combination of a memory and understanding. But there's some things you just have to memorize. And if you don't believe me, use your understanding to tell me how much 7 times 8 is. Like most of you, I think I memorized the multiplication tables, and that's why I know it's 56. Betty Roberts did ask Victor Korchnoi, and he said that there's a specialized type of chess memory, but you can't develop it naturally. It comes subconsciously, or unconsciously, rather. And I sort of knew that because so many great chess players developed a memory, of really great memory, learning all sorts of other absolutely useless information long before they got good at chess. For example, when Garry Kasparov was young and he would meet with Western chess players, he would say, name a US state, one of the 50 American states, and I'll tell you what the capital is. And most of his people talking to only knew Texas, California, New York, so it was easy, but it wasn't. They could say, Delaware, and he would say Dover, which is not bad. The thing is that Kasparov, even though he grew up in Azerbaijan, had memorized all 50 state capitals. That's not as crazy as it sounds, because there was a wonderful book about Anatoly Karpov. He lost a candidates match in 1992, and a parapsychologist wrote about his defeat. And the parapsychologist said that one of Karpov's problems was he couldn't sleep. But Karpov had programmed himself to get to sleep, and one of his techniques was he would lie down, close his eyes, and start reciting the locations of all of the Olympic Games. Starting 1896 Paris, 1896 Athens, 1900 Paris, 1904, St. Louis. By the time he got to Melbourne, he was asleep. You probably, if you're a chess player, you probably know that Magnus Carlsen, when he was about 8 years old, had memorized every world capital. So there's something about developing technique, the memory techniques that can be applied to chess. I want to, before my time goes up, I want to talk about computers a little bit, because this is one of the biggest challenges that studying chess has. You can study much faster thanks to computers. You can load up all of the Riga variations in the world from a database, and you can click through them in an hour, and you will know more about the Riga variation than Jose Capablanca ever did. But there, you pay a price for that. One of them, the prices you pay, is that you're looking at a two-dimensional set of chess pieces. Vishy Anand, who is a world champion, used to correct it. He says that the way to counter this computer mindedness is to set up on a chessboard actual, wooden, plastic pieces, whatever, chess positions, quiz positions, and go through 5 of them every day. Preferably white to win in 5 moves or something like that. And because you really want to see 3-dimensional chess. It's really bad to get hooked on flat screen television. And something else Anand said sort of struck me. He, long before he became world champion, he was in Iceland. And he got to meet the strongest local chess player, Bobby Fischer. Which sounds kind of odd because Fischer, was sort of reclusive, but Fischer was obsessed with things that having to do with India, and Anand was from Madras. So they started talking about various things, and they started looking and analyzing a game, one of the games that Anand had just played in, I think, Vikensee or someplace like that. And Fischer, could analyze very well. Anand was shocked by that because Fischer is sort of long in the tooth at that point. But then Fischer disputed, some move that Anand played, and Anand said, "No, but the computer says that's the right move. You can't argue with the computer." And this is sort of strange because Anand, like Fischer, had grown up studying from books. He had made the transition, and he could, get to the point where he had absolute faith. Well, not absolute, but a great deal of faith in computers. That's a good thing, and it's also a very bad thing, because you become passive. You sit, you click, and you say, okay, I'm going to learn naturally just by clicking. It doesn't work like that. It's like the old, things where you're supposed to put on a record at night that will read the Odyssey, and in the morning you'll know all about, Homer. You're going to learn it subconsciously. Chess requires a more dynamic interaction between you and the chess pieces. And I'll illustrate this one more with one final example. And it starts with something called the dragon variation of the Sicilian. Does anybody know why this is called the dragon variation, by the way? Yeah, because when there was a pawn here, it supposedly resembles the constellation Draco. That's how chess openings get names. Berlin Defense, Draco. Anyway, and I never saw it, but then again, I live in New York. We don't have stars. This is a very popular variation, or at least was once. I used to play this opening all the time, and periodically I would get this position. And about, I'm not going to tell you how many years ago, because it makes me sound old. But I was playing in a tournament in, well, okay, I'll reveal how old in a sense, because we were playing in a place called East Germany. And I had just drawn with a Russian by the name of Vitaly Zeshkovsky, a different variation of the dragon. And I wanted to know something about this. So I got a book that was in German by, and only published in East Germany, and by a guy named Isaac Boleslavsky, who was the leading Soviet theoretician on the Sicilian defense, and a whole bunch of other openings. And I got to the section of the book that covered this. And Boleslavsky analyzes two moves. He gives this move, and he says this is a bad move. And the reason is takes, rook takes, pawn takes, here. Black is sacrificed to the exchange, but white's king position is a mess. He's probably going to lose this pawn on c3, and if he gets that pawn, he's probably got a lot of compensation. The kingside attack by white is sort of over. I think Boleslavsky gave this move here, and here, and now here. And you can see that Black is threatening this fork, knight c4 check, winning the queen. White has to move his king or move his queen, either one. And if he plays, you know, here, for example, Black can play that. White has to stop, queen takes c3 check. If he goes there, and we're repeating the position to some extent. Okay, I understood that. That actually had been played before. Wasn't a great revelation to me. And so I wanted to so I turned the page. And this is what was recommended. This was all the rage at that time. It's an attacking move for reasons I'll tell you about, but white is going to play his pawn up here. Even if it's captured, he gets a strong attack. He eventually goes after the black king along the h-file. He's got all sorts of pieces swarming. Bobby Fischer used to say this was the variation that is sack, and mate, meaning sacrifice, sacrifice, and mate. And he said that even average players could beat masters, and better than average players could beat grandmasters in this variation. And Boleslavsky justified this with some analysis on that page. So I turned the page. And I had never seen this move before. I mean, I knew it was legal, but I never really considered it terribly strong. And then I read what Boleslavsky continued. He said, white has a strong move. He plays bishop to h6. And now, if black plays bishop takes, queen takes, rook takes, queen takes, and here's the analysis ends, and he says, and black doesn't have compensation for the exchange. And I looked at that, and then I turned 2 pages back. Hold on a second. Isn't that, like, very similar to that? What's the difference between this and that? And there was no explanation. And I have to confess that I am a scribbler. I write in all of my chess books when I have found something, and I just wrote nonsense. This is, it's obviously the other position is just as good. In fact, in many ways, it's a better position for black to have the pawns advance there, because in certain endgames, the white king is going to exploit the kingside pawns that have been weakened here. This has been verified, and a lot of experience since then. But again, I became obsessed with this position in particular because of this, because I had this skepticism, because I just didn't believe, because I could turn the page. And that eventually led to, a whole bunch of analysis, some of it wrongly credited to me in this variation, and it became a big deal. In closing, I'd like to say, before I take some questions, I'll go back to Betty Roberts one more time. She asked a bunch of players, what is chess talent? Because there's this idea that there's a natural ability to find the right move. Reuben Fine, who wrote a whole bunch of chess books, said that he never read a chess book until he was already a master. He didn't mention that when he was when he was about 12 years old, he spent 5 hours a day, 6 days a week at the Marshall Chess Club playing chess. So his sense of what is studying was a little bit different from everybody else's. But the most interesting response that Betty Roberts got was from Lothar Schmidt. Now, Lothar Schmidt is sort of forgotten today. There actually is an opening named after him, the Schmidt Benoni. He was a grandmaster. He was also an international arbiter. He was the guy who kept Bobby Fischer and Boris Spassky playing in 1972 when that match was about to blow up. He was able to spend his time on chess partly because he was a very rich man. He had the world's best private chess collection of books. And one of the reasons he amassed this wealth was because his family had a publishing firm in Germany. What was their line? Anybody know? He knew that Germans love cowboys. And the Schmidt's publishing company had the works of Karl May, who wrote about the American West. But anyway, Schmidt said, everybody's got it all wrong. Chess talent is not natural. Chess talent is the ability to study well. The person who can look through a chess book or listen to a teacher and understand at the end of the lesson what a weak square is, what a lead in development is, that's the person who is naturally talented. And I think that's probably something that even Winston Churchill could have figured out. So,
Time for some questions?
Nobody has any questions?
So I'll throw one out there.
Sure.
So when I started playing chess, I guess the first book I really read through was a collection of Al Yucking's games and his annotations. The question is, and many other game collections, I always find it very interesting, but in terms of instructive play, what would be, in your opinion, the top 3 players in history of chess whose games you would study in order to understand, to learn, to gain this insight into how to play different positions?
Good question. I would start with Paul Morphy, Jose Capablanca, I think probably, and maybe some players today whose style are very similar to Capablanca's, like Anand. When he finds he pursues a positional plan better, more directly than anybody else. Probably the last person's game I would study would be Kasparov's, or one of a lot of the players like that, because they're just too tactical. If you can't explain why this game was won in 25 words or less, if you have to say, well, white won it because knight takes c6 check, and then you give a 15-move variation, you're not going to learn anything from that. I think too many books are like that, and they're just purely tactical. They They can't, you know, even if you tried to put it into words, the nature of the moves was just, you know, I was mentioning earlier that the chess players are hero worshipers. We love to follow the games of our heroes, and you know, every morning nowadays, chess players around the world click on, you know, Chess Bomb or Chess Dom or something like that, and they follow the games of their favorite player today. How did he do well? Did Nakamura win? What's the latest story with Caruana? And the most popular format in a chess book for better than average players has traditionally been a collection of Alyekin's games, a collection of Botvinnik's games, something like that. For the last 10 years, the games of the very best players have not been anthologized because they were played by computers. The best players in the world for some time now are computers. They can't teach us anything. And we just don't learn from them. Let me tell you one story. There's a guy named Ken Thompson. If you're into computer programming, you know he's a legend. He worked at Bell Labs. More than 40 years ago, he developed something called Bell, B-E-L-L-E, which is his program. And Bell developed a database for a particular endgame. I hate to call it a basic endgame because I've just been saying how terrible that is. But it was king and queen versus king and rook. And on that basis, Ken figured out something, and he issued a challenge to the U.S. champion, Walter Brown. He said, I'll let you play king and queen. Bell will play king and rook. We'll give you 50 moves and 2 hours on the clock. And Brown knew that in every chess book it said, this is child's play. The game should be over in like 20 moves. Within 20 moves, you're going to win the rook, and then it's, you know, simple. So, and I think they had the exhibition, and I think they even showed Brown the starting position. It was a random position, but it was a position that definitely won. And he could spend some pre-game time studying that position. And the exhibition, you know, drew some attention. And after 50 moves, Walter Brown wasn't even close to winning. According to the database that Bell had, it was like 35 moves away. No, actually, it was closer than that. And the reason is that the great discovery that Thompson had made with the help of Bell is that all the human thinking about this endgame was wrong. Traditional human thinking is the rook has to stay close to the defender's king so that they can protect. The only way you lose is if the queen checks the king and then picks up the rook. And what Bell had discovered, not intentionally, but just, you know, by doing its thing, or her thing, I think, is that the rook should stay far away from the king so it can give checks, which it can't do if it stays close. And that revolutionized thinking. And when that happened, I thought, wow, that's amazing. We're going to learn so much from these computers. Chess is just going to be a different game. That was 1980. That was the last time we learned something significant from computers. If we had, you know, I thought we had a social contract with the machines. You know, we were going to program them. They were going to teach us. They haven't held up to their side of the bargain.
Time for one more question.
Yes, sir.
In this position shown on the board, would knight F5 be a good move for
Well, let's see. Knight F. Well, it's black's move, but that's the problem. It's black's move for starters. But even if it was knight F5, you're not going to have perpetual check. I can take the pawn. You can give me queen G5 check, but then I can go away, and you're going to run out of checks. And my bishop is still defending there. There are some sacrifices. There are a lot of times in this opening where knight F5 is a good move. This isn't one of them. Because of this sacrifice, black has changed the nature of the game. It's now not about white attacking. It's suddenly become black having the initiative, and which is a fancy way of saying he's calling the tune. Anything else? Way back there. Yes, sir.
The question is, how is this position better for white than the other position?
They aren't. The thing is that these two positions are identical except for the pawn, and the author of that book got it wrong. And I was trying to make I realized it simply because I could turn the page and look at it and say, hold on a second, this is like, which of these things is different from the other one? Well, they're not. They're basically the same thing. And he was making a faulty evaluation. And I was right.
All right, thank you very much. And now, giving the presentation award for this year's Chess Educator of the Year will be Dr. Abby Kratz, Associate Provost.
I just want to thank you for bringing us understanding.
Okay.
Betty Rogers would like that. But in a university that is chock full of computers,
Yes.
in a room that is in a building that is full of books, you have brought us three-dimensional understanding, and we are so honored that you're able to come here to UTD.
Oh.
So we want to honor you with the plaque that you can have forever
Oh,
that
thank you.
shows that you came here.
Thank you.
And congratulations on
Great.
being our Chess Educator of the Year.
Why don't we do Wow.
All right. And that concludes our official ceremony. Thank you very much for coming out tonight. And we'll look forward to maybe seeing you at some of our other activities in the future. Thank you.